Well, hello, my name is Kevin Lafferty and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Paths for All, and I'm an Executive Committee member of the Outdoor Recreation Network. I'm really excited to be here with you today, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to existing ORN members and to thank you if you are joining us for the first time today. So just to reiterate on the housekeeping, the mics and the cameras for attendees are turned off for the launch, and this is due to the large number that have registered for today's event. We are recording the webinar today, and that recording will be available soon, and it will be sent to you via an e-zine link, so you'll get a chance to share that with colleagues. And that will be an open link, so it'll be you'll be able to cascade that and share that with contacts and colleagues. So I wanted to say a few words just about the Outdoor Recreation Network to start off with. ORN is an unincorporated network of public agencies and non-governmental organisations from across the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. And ORN grew out of the Countryside Recreation Network, which was known as the CRN, and that was established in 1968. So benefiting from a long history of partnership, ORN member organisations are involved in outdoor recreation and related fields such as the natural environment, outdoor activities and recreation, tourism and health. And the vision is to encourage more people to enjoy and engage with the outdoors. Our members from across the UK work in collaboration to help share research, facilitate information exchange and to champion sustainable good practice. And I'm delighted to be your chair today and to welcome you on behalf of the Outdoor Recreation Network, Paths for All and the Sensory Trust to the launch of the new Outdoor Accessibility Guidance, supporting inclusive access in the UK. Now, today's launch event exemplifies information exchange and collaboration to raise awareness and to promote inclusive outdoor access. And I know that many of us on the call today are really passionate about inclusive outdoor access and have worked to improve access to the outdoors throughout our careers. So for me personally, my dad was a wheelchair user and he lived with dementia for several years before he passed. And together we experienced a wide range of barriers over the years, not only physical barriers, but attitudinal and cultural barriers as well. So the guidance is a really important document for me personally and for the sector. And the new guidance is free, and the link to download the guidance will be shared with you at the end of today's launch event. So many of us will be aware that some sectors of society are benefiting more from outdoor access than others, and the guide is to help make sure the outdoors are inclusive and more accessible for everyone. Now, the pandemic highlighted the inequity in access to the outdoors, and it was a clear call to action to remove barriers and engage underrepresented groups and protected characteristics. So Paths for All and the Sensory Trust have worked collaboratively to update and expand guidance. And the guidance you will hear about today will make our outdoor places and spaces, routes and facilities more accessible and outdoor experiences more inclusive, so they can be enjoyed by everyone. And it's written for anyone managing land for public access and recreation, including land managers, community trusts, community groups and volunteers, access and recreation teams and owners. Now, I'm delighted today to be joined by two excellent keynote speakers who will introduce the new guidance and provide an overview highlighting the key sections and talking about the access chain and the least restrictive access tools. But before I do that, if we can just move on to the next slide, please. That's great. Yeah, I just wanted to mention before the first speaker, the ORN annual conference, and the conference theme this year is Action for Inclusive Access, applying the outdoor recreation guidance, and it will take place on the 6th and the 7th of June at Wheatwood Hall Estate in Leeds. Now, this is a key conference and a key event where we will discuss the content and application of the guidance in further detail. So I'd please ask you to save the date in your diaries, and also to highlight that today is really about us sharing the key information with you. And we'll take a deep dive into the discussion at the in-person conference in Leeds in June. So time for discussion will come later. Today is really about us sharing the guidance with you. So I'm now delighted to introduce my colleague and today's first keynote speaker. Rona Gibb is a senior manager at Paths for All, and Rona has worked at Paths for All for over 20 years, and she looks after the community paths, policy and communication teams. And Rona has had a successful 33-year career within the public and third sectors in Scotland. She was seconded to the Scottish Government for 14 months in 2013 to help develop the National Walking Strategy, and also to facilitate the National Walking Strategy Delivery Forum. Now, going right back, Rona started her career as a countryside ranger in a local authority, and she was a senior tutor at the Field Centre in Perthshire, managed a European-funded interpretive project across the Highlands and Islands, and she later became an access manager in Argyll and Bute. So she's got a wealth of experience on access issues. And she also had a stint overseas with the British Council developing community-based interpretive projects in Brazil. So Rona has been involved in the early focus groups and the pilots for the original Countryside for All guide. And throughout Rona's working life, the focus has been on getting people outside, getting them active and getting them to enjoy that outdoor environment. So welcome, Rona. We're looking forward to hearing from you today.
Thanks, Kevin. And I'm delighted to be here with so many people on this call today. We've been working on this guide for a long time now, and a lot of you who are on the call will have been involved at different stages. So we're really pleased to see everybody on the call. Well, not see everybody because you've all got your cameras off, but certainly having you all on the call today. So I thought I'd just do a very brief introduction to who Paths for All are, because I'm aware if you're not in Scotland, you won't know about us unless you've had one of our guides over the many years. So we were founded in '96. We're a Scottish charity. We have 30 national Scottish partner organisations. We have an annual turnover of around 16.3 million, and most of our funding comes through the Scottish Government Health Division and through Transport Scotland. So as an organisation, we have are well established in this sector, and I would say from the beginning that the previous guide and least restrictive access and access for all is a fundamental of everything that we do. It's a founding part of all that we do. Next slide, please. So just in terms of our vision, our focus predominantly is around getting people walking and wheeling, and we're wanting everybody to do that every day, creating a happier and healthier, greener Scotland. So we talk about walkings for everywhere, every day and everyone. Within all of this, we're looking to create better walking societies, creating better walking environments and creating better walking systems. Now, around this, we have a wider remit that looks at not just walking. We look within the Land Reform Act in Scotland. It's about cycling, horse riding, non-motorised access. So it's a much wider remit that we have in a number of areas, but our predominant focus for our work is around walking. And to develop those areas, we have our Walking for Health team, which supports over 850 weekly health walks in Scotland, supporting people who are living with dementia, with buggy walks for parents, and a wide range of workplace and other interventions. We have our Community Paths and Ian Finlay Path Fund teams who are looking at path infrastructure and working with communities to support the creation and maintenance and management of path networks. And then we have our Smarter Choices, Smarter Places team who are working on behaviour change through active travel. And supporting all of that are our comms and policy teams. So a wide range of work that we cover. Next slide, please. Our strategy, which you've just seen a slide of, is based on the World Health Organization GAPA programme. So that's the Global Action Plan for Physical Activity. And those are the 4 areas which you'll see from what I've just said are very similar to what we've used. And that's an approach that in Scotland is being used quite regularly and across the board, and certainly within government to deliver on physical activity targets. So a very important link through, so not just at our national level, but at a wider level. Next slide, please, Jane. And just a slide that shows why it's so important that walking is part of this, and wheelchair access and disability aids is a significant part of that. Linking in with a wide number of policy areas, which you'll all be very familiar with, I'm sure, and making sure that whatever we are doing through to Scottish Government and through to local authorities and beyond is all linked in through this. Next slide, please. Some of you may be aware of the guidance that we've produced in the past. For the last 20 odd years, we've produced a number of guidance documents which have been aimed at a Scottish audience, but have actually gone much further. We're aware of sending out the guides to many different countries and across the UK as well. So things like the Surfacing Path Guides, the Lowland Path Construction Guide, Outdoor Access Design Guide, Signage Guide, and the more recent Path Manager's Guide to Grading. And the grading guidance is something that is being rolled out across Scotland with land managers and organisations using that in different ways to give a more coordinated approach to messaging on the guide on grading. So getting to why we're here today, most of you will be aware of the BT Countryside for All Good Practice Guide. It has been a benchmark document in the UK for 20 odd years. It was developed by the Fieldfare Trust, who are no longer operating, and was part of a wider BT Countryside for All project sponsored by BT at the time. And interestingly, the only picture I could find to put up of the old guide didn't have the BT logo on it, which I know the updated version does, but my own copy has so many stickers over the front of it, you weren't going to get to see that today. So it's been used for a long time. It had a lot of piloting. In a previous existence, I was involved in some of the piloting in the late 1990s. Which is a very, very long time ago, and it was revised in 2005. So many of you will be using this document, and if you're not using this document itself, you will probably be using a document that has been based on this, and you've produced your own local guidance. But it has fundamentally changed the understanding and management of access to the outdoors for people with disabilities, and we owe a huge debt to the Fieldfare Trust and everybody that was involved in all of that work to have got it to the stage that we did. When the Fieldfare Trust were looking at closing their doors, we were approached by them to take on the copyright of the guide, and we were delighted to do that. We'd had a long involvement with it. Fieldfare Trust had worked with us on many projects and development of many of our previous publications that I've already highlighted, and this was a natural step for us to take this on. And part of that agreement was that we would look to see if we could update the guidance. So that was the process we started in 2018, and over the next wee while, a lot of discussions with different people, a lot of discussions around funding. We've had several phases of funding to get to the stage that we are today, and we commissioned the Sensory Trust and Jane Stoneman, who you'll be hearing from very soon, to update the guidance. And the decision that we took at the time was that we didn't want to just take the guidance as it was and just do a refresh of that. We actually wanted to widen it out and base it on the Equalities Act, so that we were looking at a much wider range of characteristics as well as physical disability. Next slide, please, Jane. So before I hand over to Jane, I just want to thank a huge number of people, and I'm not going to name everybody individually. I couldn't. There has been a massive support for this document, and I can't express how grateful we are for the time and the enthusiasm that so many people have put into this, giving us financial support, and the financial supporters are listed there, but also those that have given their time to look at different drafts, to respond to different things, to provide case studies and everything else that has gone on to get the guide to the stage that it's at today. So for all of you that are out there that are listening today that have been part of that, please pat yourself on the back. We're very grateful for that, and we hope that when you have a chance to look at the guidance, that you'll be very pleased with what you see and be able to take that into your own workplaces and use it going forward, so that the legacy of the original document can continue. So I'm going to, I think Kevin's popped back in, so I think he's going to do an introduction for Jane. So I'll pass back to Kevin to introduce Jane for the next section. Thank you.
Thanks, Rona, and really great to get the background and the context. And I think for a great number of us who had the opportunity and the pleasure of working with Fieldfare Trust over many years, I think this is a great next phase and a great refresh and update of a really important guidance document for the whole of the UK. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our second keynote speaker today, Jane Stoneham. Jane is a director at the Sensory Trust, an organisation that champions the creation of accessible and engaging nature experiences. With a background in landscape management, Jane has over 30 years of experience of advising on an inclusive approach to the design and management of outdoor spaces. She regularly undertakes site access reviews. She advises on sensory design and develops tools and approaches like the access chain and rights guidance. And she's been the access advisor to the Eden Project, and she's produced bespoke inclusive training and review tools for organisations such as the National Trust, Forestry England and Natural Resources Wales. So publications include By All Reasonable Means for Natural England and Natural Resources Wales, and the original version of Easy Access to Historic Landscapes for Historic England. Landscape Design for the Elderly and Disabled People, and Making Connections, a guide to accessible green space design. So we're delighted to have Jane with us today, and Jane has been instrumental in helping to develop the updated guidance, and really looking forward to hearing from you. Jane, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Rona, for such a fantastic introduction to today. It's just such a pleasure to be at this point in time. As Rona said, it's been quite a long journey. You know, we've been immersed in the development of this guide for a long while now, and had the pleasure of working closely with Paths for All. And it's I can't quite believe actually that we've got to this point now where the guide's going to be available, and you can all go and see for yourselves what we've come up with. Excuse me. Thank you so much to all of you for joining in today. Thank you for the level of interest. I know many of you have been actively involved in guide in one way or another. So thank you so much for that. It's great to be joining you from the Sensory Trust down here in Cornwall. And I'm delighted to say when I glance out the window, we actually have sunshine. So that's auspicious for today, I think. It's a great day to be launching the guide. So as Kevin mentioned about the Sensory Trust, we're UK-wide. At our heart is the challenge of, excuse me, I'm so sorry. I just knocked something over. At the heart of what we do is making the outdoors accessible and engaging for everybody, regardless of age, disability and background. We run quite a wide collection of project work. You know, we're working with young people with additional needs, introducing nature-based activities into their learning and development. We work with older people with dementia and organise outdoor engagement sessions with nature. We're working very much in the area of sensory interpretation at the moment, with a focus on industrial heritage and how to make heritage more inclusive. And we've got new work that's where we're looking more closely at certain areas of language and communication. For example, BSL and Widget, and Makaton as areas where we're keen to explore how language can be a way that we can open up rich and engaging experiences with nature. But of particular relevance today, as Kevin has mentioned, is the work that we've done. This is very dear to our heart. We've worked on guidance and publications for a very long time now, and it does include work that we've generated ourselves. Making Connections actually came out of some research work that we did back in the 90s, where we were keen to explore really what was going on with barriers to the outdoors, and we did quite extensive survey work to find out directly from disabled people, but also from people managing outdoor places to find out really what the barriers were. And that opened up really some very rich themes for us, I think, in terms of areas that we realised were very important to look at. So it certainly put us on the path of looking at areas like information and inclusive communications, because it came up as a very strong focus when people talked about what the barriers were that were impacting on people going out and about. We've also done work with other organisations. So, for example, Grounds for Sharing with Learning Through Landscapes, and Kevin's mentioned the other work like Easy Access to Historic Landscapes and the Bioreasable Means. And these have been really important for us in coming to this latest work. I think the experience of producing these guidance has been really important in not just a sort of knowledge base, but I think a familiarity with how you journey your way through the development of a guide. So delighted to be focusing in on the new guide, the Outdoor Accessibility Guidance. Here's the cover, and you'll be able to download this from today. Where I want to start today is really to go back to the beginning. We came into the picture in, I think, Rona, it was 2020, when we were commissioned to start with a survey. So what this was looking at was really the question of how did people value the original guide? And what from that could we learn about how people would like to use the new guide, and what would they like to see? So basically, we ran a survey, UK-wide survey, and we got about 100 responses, which was fantastic. I know some of you who are here today joined in with this, and the information we got from it was really instrumental in learning really what the new guide needed to be doing. So we asked questions about the original guide and how it was valued. No surprise at all, it echoed our own feelings about the Countryside for All guide, which was, it was a fantastic resource. People were still using it. People were recommending it to others, and but obviously recognising that it needed updating. We explored really how people were using the guidance already, because this was important to indicate really what the new guidance was how it was going to be used, how people wanted to be implementing it. And what we found from that was that people were using it as the basis for running things like access reviews, assessing routes, also formulating maintenance plans and planning access improvements, sometimes as the basis for in-house standards and good practice. But also interestingly, people were talking about how they sometimes used it to advise others and to influence others. So that was all very useful to find out. We wanted to know what content matters most. This was the most significant part of the survey really for us, because it got us to understand what the content needed to do. And what came out very strongly was people saying that the standards and the information sheets, the technical information, was really important. So it was indicating that people were keen to have information that is very much about how to. We drilled down a bit more into that content, and it showed us that those areas of information, like the technical guidance, but also updating on statutory legal requirements, was very important, along with things like the standards and principles. But it was all really as takeaways, and you know, giving us a roadmap for the new guide. What it showed us was that we needed a guide that was very much focused on how to. People wanted something that would take the principles and show, well, how do you move that through to actually what you do in your organisations and community groups, but also in making changes on the ground. As Rona mentioned, you know, there's been a strong call for the guide to represent a wider diversity of people, but also to expand in terms of the types of outdoor places that the guide talks about, and the types of uses, the types of activities, the different ways that people like and want to engage with the outdoors was all very important. And aligning with other guidance, that's something that's we're very conscious of, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go a bit further through. So we took all that was our roadmap, and off we were on the journey of developing the guide. Now, every stage of this, from putting the initial framework together and the very rough first content and testing out the sort of areas of content that needed to be there, every stage of this was an iterative process. So it involved a lot of research of guidance, research of expertise that's already out there, a lot of consultation, lots of conversations, and quite a lot of critique as well. So the process we ran through was really, we would draft, we would test by sharing with people. That would come back with feedback and critique, and we would refine from that, and we would finalise. It's why it's been a long process. This takes quite a lot of time, but it was really important to us that this was the way that the guide was built, because I know that Pastoral were really keen that this was a guide that would involve people in its creation, and it certainly has done that. And we're so grateful for how people have contributed to the content that's in here. And it's been quite challenging at times, because, as you'll be aware, you know, not all the advice is consistent. So it wasn't unusual for us to have, we'd find through the research or through what people fed back, some inconsistencies, and we would have to then drill down and work out, well, what do you do with that? Where do you find the best answer for something that you can provide then as a piece of guidance? So we then ran that through to obviously a final editing, design and layout, and here we are with the finish today. And what the guide carries in it is that widening of a diversity of people and a diversity of place and the types of activities that we were looking at. And we were particularly keen to be highlighting some of the areas that don't tend to be quite so visible. So some of the more hidden disabilities, aspects like people with neurodiversity, for example, or people living with fatigue, and what that means for thinking about accessibility and inclusive practices. Things like play. Play doesn't really get the focus it deserves in terms of making play inclusive for young people, but also, why is it just for young people? Thinking about play for different ages. Thinking about places, that some of the places that are particularly challenging are water and beaches. You know, they can very often be particularly inaccessible. So we were keen to look at, well, what can happen? What can be done? What are people doing? You know, what can we look to that gives us inspiration, and then finding recipes or guidance rather for how people can put practice, good practice together. And we've very much carried the idea of different places, you know, from wilder countryside through to more urban, more formal, more managed landscapes. And Kevin, I'm really pleased that you highlighted the pandemic, because we've been working on this through pandemic, and I think that point, that what that's highlighted to us as a society about both the importance of the outdoors, but also the inaccessibility of the outdoors. And one of the things that I think is particularly significant for this guidance coming out at this time is that I think what the pandemic also did was to remind us of how important our day-to-day local green space is to us. You know, for a lot of people, it's the walk that people can have, or the wheel that people can have quite near to home. They can just go out, it might be a local footpath. And bringing those sort of spaces into the same remit, where we think about, well, what do we do there? How do we make sure that we're looking at all these opportunities being much more accessible? So then there's a couple of tools and principles really that underpin the guide that I just wanted to highlight. And one of them is least restrictive access. And this is really a principle that's about making sure that all new work and maintenance aims to achieve the highest, the most accessible option that it can achieve. And what least restrictive access does really is to help us get away from this idea that we can simply say, well, some places are just simply too challenging, they're not accessible. Because with least restrictive access, there's always the question of, well, what can be done? And even with some specific things we can change, actually it still makes a difference. We can still enhance the accessibility. The classic example is if there's an inaccessible gate, and we can change that to an accessible one, or even better, get rid of it and have a gap, then we've made a huge difference in being able to access that route. The other thing I want to highlight here really, which I think is another important principle for the guide, is that, you know, when you think about what the barriers are outdoors and where they come from, most of them are there because at some point somebody has made a decision about how something is going to work. So whether it's a width of a route, or whether it's a choice of surface material, or the way a gradient has been dealt with, or whether seating has been provided or not, or whether information is there and how that's presented, these are all the results of people having made decisions. And very often those decisions have been based on the law of averages. But the problem is, when we always design for an average, we keep leaving out the same people over and over again. So one of the important things I think with the guidance is that what we'd like to see is that the decision-making process changes. And instead of thinking in that way, we're thinking, well, actually, we're recognizing the real diversity of people. And we're recognizing that if we make those decisions differently, then we can make things more accessible, we can make them more inclusive, and in that way, they will be genuinely more open to more people. Another of the underlying tools and principles is the access chain. This is something I can't quite remember actually when we developed this. It was a long time ago, but the access chain is a way of identifying a series of steps that are involved in somebody going out somewhere. So it leads from the very first part of that, which is when people decide to go somewhere. And that's based on people knowing whether that place will be accessible, what it's like, what they can expect. The second step is the actual journey and arrival. Can people get there? What's the welcome like, and aspects like that. And it's not until you get to the third step that you really get to look at the specifics of what the site or the route is actually like itself and what the experience adds up to. And then the fourth step is actually when people leave to go home. And it's one that's quite often forgotten, but the one I often talk about is if somebody's final experience of going somewhere is a half-mile walk or wheel uphill back to the car, and they leave with the idea that they feel lucky to have survived it, it's not boding well for a return repeat experience. And the reason we developed it was because we were finding that there was such a focus on step 3 and not really recognizing the other steps. And of course, if the barriers aren't dealt with all of the steps of the chain, then really it's not going to add up to a successful visit. So this threads through the guide. We've included some tools that are based on it, but as an approach, it's very strongly bedded into the guidance. I mentioned how keen we are to align the guidance, and in particular, we are looking to align with the Bioreasable means guides. Now, these are published by Natural England and Natural Resources Wales, and there are plans already in action where we're working with both organisations to bring these two guides together into one and to update and to align them with the outdoor accessibility guidance. So there will be more news on that. It shouldn't be that far ahead that this will be this will be an outcome too. So I promise I'm not going to go in detail through what's nearly 200 pages of the guide, but I did think I would just give you a window into how the guidance has been put together and what you can expect. So the first section of the guidance really is about principles and background approaches. So the very start of it, section 1, is introducing the guidance and explaining how it's intended to work. This is followed by a section on the legislative framework, and this is UK-wide. So this was an interesting challenge because I hadn't appreciated really how much difference there is at times between the different UK countries. But anyway, that is a lead through the most significant legislation, including the Equality Act 2010. And then the section 3 is where we get into an inclusive approach and talk about, well, what does that mean and how do you make sure that you're implementing the widest range of changes that are necessary to really bring in an effective inclusive approach to the work. So this is including things like inclusive policies for an organisation or a community group, thinking about training and professional development. It also talks about the importance of working with communities and participation and representation, and goes on to aspects like access reviews and action plans. So this is really about process at this point. This is setting out some of the approaches and processes. And then we get into the technical guidance. As I've mentioned, this is a big focus for the guide. And this really is intended to be reference material where you go and find what it is that you're looking for and find the sections that are particularly relevant to you. It's divided up into, there's a section A, which is all about how people get around. So it's paths and routes, and it starts from planning and runs through to reviewing. It details specifics like choices of surfaces, gradients, widths, steps, all of that, and also talks about some types of use like horse riding and the increasing interest in adaptive cycling and all the developments that are happening there. That's very exciting. And then section B is about really how people are interacting with different sites and routes. So this is about facilities and activities. Picks up on really important aspects like seating and shelter and toilets and parking, through to thinking around, you know, when you're planning events and activities, elements like play, it's making sure that all of those are also factored into an inclusive approach. And then C is inclusive communication. This is all things information. So from pre-visit through to the information actually provided on site in wayfinding, people running guided tours, thinking about specific languages and communication methods. And this is an element that threads its way through the whole guide in quite an important way. I think, as I mentioned at the start, when we did the Making Connections work, accessible information and inclusive communication are just so important as an element to making places accessible and welcoming and engaging. So we've made sure to bring that in throughout a lot of the guide. We then run on to the final sections, D and E, which this is where this is the outward looking section where we are basically signposting. We're providing access to some site and route review tools, but we are also signposting to other sources of guidance. There's such a fantastic array of guidance out there, as well as organisations and groups and experts who are doing amazing work. So we've done our best to include signposts to things that should be there. I know we will have missed some things. I apologise now, but please, if you see things that you think, oh, that really ought to be in there, do let us know, and we'll be really pleased to be adding them in. And then really to bring it to a conclusion, you know, this is now available. We have Paths for All obviously have published the guide today, and you can download it for free from the Paths for All website. We are planning to keep this as an up-to-date guide. We're conscious that, you know, things change, and actually my hope is that things really do change quite a lot as we move forward. So we would like this guidance to keep track with developments that we see and how things do change. So if you have examples of good practice, examples that you think would be fantastic to put into future updated versions of this, then please do send them through. There's going to be a form on the Paths for All website, as far as I understand, so that will make the process very easy. I just want to finish by saying a big thank you to Paths for All for putting their trust in us to take on this piece of work. I'd like to thank everybody who's contributed to the work, the people behind the original guide, because that was fantastic. And I'd like to just share a heartfelt thanks to my own team who've been instrumental in all this and just been fantastic. So thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for joining today.
Thanks, Jane. That was an excellent overview and introduction to the guidance, and I think we have now got the link up and live, so you can download the document, and obviously in the chat box of the chat pane the link is there. and a real milestone today. And it is a call for celebration, because what this is doing is this is helping to make the outdoors more inclusive and more accessible for everyone. And I know we have a number of really passionate ORN members and non-members who have been working hard over a long number of years to make the outdoors more inclusive. So well done, everybody, and continue this good work. I think the job is not finished. We are got new guidance which provides, I suppose, a far wider overview of how we can make the outdoors inclusive and also connect the built and the natural environments. And this is about making sure that facilities also give consideration to the spaces and the places that surround them and how we move between the two. So we've got the last couple of minutes just to summarise and close. I just want to reiterate the link to the guidance document is available. We have a feedback form and the conference booking information has also been sent to your inboxes and it's been shared in the chat box. So again, just to share that date, the 6th and the 7th of June at Wheatwood Hall Estate in Leeds. Please save the date. Now, today wasn't providing an opportunity for Q&A or questions. The conference is the opportunity for us to meet in person and to have that more in-depth conversation and those sessions to look at how we implement the guidance on the ground and what it means for land managers and service providers. So please come along and join us for that. And as Jane has highlighted, the guidance, there's a comment box on our website at Paths for All, and if you spot any broken links or have any specific suggestions around case studies or best practice, then you can flag that with us. But we're hoping it will be a process of continual improvement. But we've tried our level best to make sure we haven't missed anything important in the guidance document. So I'd like to finish by taking this opportunity again to thank our two keynote speakers today, Rona and Jane, for their excellent presentations, and to thank all of you, the delegates, for joining us today. I hope to see many of you at the conference in June. And finally, a big thank you to Jane and Elizabeth from the ORN Secretariat for coordinating today's launch event, and to all of my fellow ORN Executive Committee members who have joined us on the call today. I'd like to ask you to please get in touch with Jane or Elizabeth if you're interested in registering to become an ORN member, or if you want to discuss any of the membership options. So again, this is the start of the journey. I'm sure you're going to find the guide really informative. It's a long read, but there's got a lot of detail which really does bring that inclusive and more accessible approach to how we manage the outdoors forward, and really, you know, looking forward to using it and implementing it on the ground. So on behalf of all of the executive committee, thank you for attending today and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you for attending. Bye now.